Everyone, welcome back to Manufacturing Hub on this Wednesday. If you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you guys have been longtime listeners, you might realize that Vlad and I have had a while since it was just he and I talking on a particular topic, which is exactly what we were mentioning. But we always have fun going and having these conversations and sharing some of this knowledge and sharing some of this experience. So everyone, officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub episode 235. I'm Dave. This guy over here to my right is Vlad. This month we're talking all about systems integration. And specifically today, Vlad and I are going to try to tackle the topic of how to build a systems integrator, very much along the lines of what are the steps. And as we were coming up with like 12 pages of notes, what are the minimum viable steps of how you can go about doing this. If you guys have questions as we're going through, or you just want to say hi, please feel free to go ahead and say hi, drop a comment in the chat. If you guys are running a systems integrator or thinking about running a systems integrator, want to share some experiences or ask us questions or go reply to other folks in the chat, please always feel free to go ahead and do so. Those are some of our most fun topics and will absolutely derail the absolutely 100% jam-packed conversation that we are planning to have today. Before we go ahead and jump in, I felt it appropriate to go ahead and give a little bit of introductions on each of us. Vlad, you want to go introduce or hopefully reintroduce yourself and why people should care about this, please?
Absolutely. So I'll give it a shot as briefly as I can make it. So my name is Vladimir Romanov. I have been in the manufacturing and the industrial automation space for over a decade, working for various larger, I would say, end users, Procter and Gamble, Kraft Heinz, Post Holdings, followed by a series of roles at systems integrators, again, from engineering to engineering management, maintenance management type of roles, followed by some startup ventures, as well as a lot of consulting and project-based roles. And at this point, I run Joltech, where we basically focus on strategy, integration, and education to help manufacturers modernize operations, align IT and OT priorities, and make smarter decisions on the plant floor.
Vlad, it certainly sounds like you do a lot of work, which is factually true. Vlad's last 10 years are probably jam-packed with about, 40,000 hours of experience in there, and that in fact may be a low number, but thank you for that, Vlad. Off to me. Hey everyone, my name is Dave Griffith. I've spent the last 16 plus years in automation and manufacturing. My technical background is in aviation and aerospace. And when I came out of tech school, that is where I started working for an OEM machine builder. I spent a little bit of time as a manufacturer's rep and distributor on the hardware and a little bit of the software side. And then about 3 years running a systems integration company where we mostly focused on the MES, the manufacturing execution systems level. From that point, 6.5 years ago, I started Kaplan Solutions, and our goal was very much to offer end-to-end solutions, not just we're going to go ahead and do the requirements that lots of times systems integrators are presented with, and then let operational problems continue as operational problems. Our goal is to go in and help on the front end, create those requirements and specifications, and then go ahead and help deliver those solutions. And then along the way, we have continued to get deeper and deeper back into ignition development. Absolutely. We've got Alicia in the comments. Hey, Alicia.
Yep.
If I remembered the episode that you were just on with us a couple of months ago, I would go ahead and call that out. We'll go ahead and drop it in the comments. Alicia actually had a really interesting LinkedIn post about pricing that we may or may not be able to get into based upon everything else that we're going to try to do. Vlad, because we can't do anything simple and just like jump into any particular thing, we want to talk about what is systems integration or what is a systems integrator. Can you go ahead and give us a bit of a definition?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to take a really quick step back, right, I think it's important to define the topic of the conversation before we can break it down. And I don't want to assume that everyone is on the same page when it comes to systems integration, especially with the fact that it can mean a lot of different things in different domains. So, in the context of the conversation we're going to have today, a systems integrator is serving the end customer that is going to be in a variety of different verticals when it comes to manufacturing, and a systems integrator is going to seek to create value on a couple of different fronts. So if you look at the P&L of a typical systems integrator, the number one asset usually is going to be its people who are going to conduct work in order to basically find technical solutions for the end user. And the second usual biggest item is going to be the revenue coming from the sales of solutions that have been built by somebody else, typically labeled as an OEM. And so a systems integrator core business is not going to be selling those products. It will be integrating and making sure that these systems are basically configured and are running accordingly for the end user. But it is also going to be the selection process of key partners, in which the aspects of which we're going to get into in a couple of moments. But ultimately, they are selecting the right tools, software, and hardware applicable for the end users that they're doing work with. And of course, naturally, there's going to be different shapes and sizes of systems integrators, so they will accomplish that to a varying degree of success. Some will be on one side taking whatever work that comes at them and learning platforms on the spot, and the other ones are going to specialize very heavily either on the stack or the specific vertical that they are in. Again, we're going to unpack that in just a moment. Dave, do you have anything to add to my definition of the context of systems integrators?
Absolutely. I think that was a great definition of systems integrators. My LinkedIn absolutely 100% imploded as you were talking about that. So I think that that's a fantastic definition. I feel like we almost need to go slightly broader because as I was reviewing this, I realized that you and I wrote a lot of this very specific to to the software side, right, and less so on machine builder, less so on the other side. And you
Mhm.
did talk about the OEM solutions. You did talk about the OEM solutions in there. But having said that, I think you did a really good job when it comes to defining that broadly.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think the lines are going to be blurry, right? Between if we talk about system integrator versus machine builder versus, someone who provides just software services, but it's obviously going to be in those details and nuances. I think for the purposes of 1 hour worth of a conversation, we can only get into so much detail, so to speak, as we go through these topics. So I
Absolutely, and
guess,
it's
let me
mostly because
go.
I was going to say absolutely, Vlad. Mostly because you refused to go sit online and talk about this for 20 hours, which is probably what it would take in order to actually get through this. And I don't think anyone would want to go listen to us lose our voices live on stream. Uh, let's go jump into deciding to go start your systems integrator, right? So, like on the how-to side, at some point you have to decide to start. Do you want to share some of your thoughts on those decisions? Would you like me to start on some of those thoughts of the decisions?
I can definitely start and share some experiences and conversations. So, usually, the starting point for many individuals, at least from my experience, has been their frustration with the current role, and they could be working at an end user or an integrator. They have gained a lot of different deep technical expertise where they are more than capable of providing the services that a system integrator usually deals in. And that is, like I said, helping end users solve different technical challenges. And so the motivation, I would say, is, like I said, going off on your own, building something that is proprietary to you, ultimately leveraging your skill set, hopefully land better projects than you're currently working on. We have a few points under this conversation. So contractor versus business builder. So again, there's going to be different nuances when it comes to deciding if you'd like to take on contracts and grow the business from there, or immediately start to try and hire a team. There's a number of systems integrators that will refer out a chunk of their work. So ultimately, there are a lot of possibilities as to when you label yourself as a systems integrator, how you actually handle some of those projects. What are your
Absolutely.
thoughts, Dave?
I would agree with that. As I think about lots of people that I know who have started systems integration companies, it almost exclusively is a person who is probably on the technical side of things, who has come up within systems integration or maybe bounced between integration and an end user role, and has gotten to the point where they're either frustrated with the politics and bureaucracy, or they think that the admin and all of those back end things are really easy, and why aren't they making more money comparative to their overall rate? And so they go through the process of making that decision to go out and start on their own. I do know a couple of people who it's like, hey, 2, 3, 5 of us have all come together, or a previous group had closed or collapsed or went out of business in one particular area, and they've come
Mhm.
together. But I would say the vast majority of people I know who are in the starting integrator side, it is I have a project, or I feel like I could go do this better, or I feel like I could go make some more money. And so they go hang out that shingle. And then it's very much the question of, which direction do they go? And I think you brought up a bunch of really good examples of the directions that those organizations can go as they talk about starting to grow the business. Um,
Yeah. And so I guess let me bring up two important points, right, as we wrap up this deciding to start a company. I think the two very important decisions or conversations you should be having, or at least when you're evaluating the choices, is number one, the skill gaps, right? So a lot of times, as both of us have mentioned, you will
mhm,
underestimate what it truly takes to run a
mhm,
business. And I would say not only on the back end office side, but also in terms of bringing in work, right? Because when you're at an
mhm,
end user, usually the company is making a product. So you're basically asked to automate and find
mhm,
opportunities to better the process, which ultimately is paid out of the revenue that comes in by selling the product. And if you're working for a systems integrator, there's typically going to be, to an extent, and again, that's the nuance between different
mhm,
systems integrators, there's going to be some kind of a sales process, sales team, maybe inbound marketing team, right? So there's going to be a steady flow of leads or recurring work that comes in the door, at which point you are assigned said work. So when you go off on your own, it is very challenging, I would say, to build out that pipeline at the same time as you're executing the technical side. And number two,
absolutely.
again, yeah, I was gonna say, like, a number two is doing the work versus building a business. I think is a challenge for many, because you can
Mhm,
very easily get stuck in a contractor mindset where for the next 10 years you're basically instead of being an employee, you're a contractor for a company, and you could be doing that kind of work until retirement, pretty much.
absolutely. Absolutely. I would say I think both of those thoughts are typically further than the initial I've decided to go start the company, or I've decided to go start the organization. In
Hmm.
my experience, lots of, especially engineers, other technical people, look at sales, look at marketing, look at accounting, look at kind of any of these other ancillary um areas that people spend hundreds or thousands of hours a year working on, and is like, how hard could it possibly be? I can go program all of these different PLCs, or I know all of these different
Hmm.
scripting language, or I know all of these different languages. How hard can it possibly be? And so
Yep.
typically I see a lot of times where people just get absolutely like, they run into a wall, because it's one of those learning experiences.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I would say the contractor versus business builder, I think all of it makes sense. I think both of those make sense. I know a lot of people who have grown businesses or have worked within organizations and grown teams and then decided that they just wanted to go be an individual contributor again. So I
Yep.
100% agree. That is probably along the lines of, hey, we're doing really well, or hopefully we're doing really well. Let's go add some more people.
Let me address this comment that Alicia made because I think it's relevant to starting a company before we move on. So, what she's saying is, I kept getting fired. These people couldn't handle the truth. So, it was time and I couldn't be happier. No, I will not use this zirconium sensor that gets us up to 700 degrees Celsius in a hydrogen line. I value my life and those of my coworkers. And I think this illustrates, the sentiment that many people have and
Mm-hmm.
will not always necessarily share in a general sense as they go off on their own. I would say that there is a place where I guess this is the reason why corporate politics are a thing, and you need to
Mm-hmm.
play a specific role as a cog in a machine, so to speak. That being said, I think that to an extent, right, having done a lot of different projects and consulting work outside of being an employee, what you
Mm-hmm.
will also realize is that you still need to navigate some of those lines, perhaps not
Mm-hmm.
as closely,
Mm-hmm.
but you still have somebody to answer to at the end of the day if you want to grow and progress within the company. So I think it obviously it depends, but it is still difficult, I would say, at least for me, to have as much of a separation as you would originally imagine
Mm-hmm.
going off on your own. I think you still need to be, to some extent, reserved about some of your thoughts on the plant floor and the individuals that run certain operations. I will put it that way.
Absolutely. As I have had some smart people put it to me, going and running your own company or running your own organization, you get to go make all of those decisions, right? If
Hmm.
there are issues, if there are frustrating points in which other people are perhaps making decisions that you wouldn't make, if you're the boss, you get to go make all those decisions, but you get to also go have all of those stresses. And to your point, Vlad, every client is your boss, right? Like you have to go do the things that need to be done to make the clients happy so that they pay you and hopefully continue to go work with you or hopefully go continue to work with your team. So you may give up one boss for 5 bosses or 10 bosses or 15 bosses. That is certainly one of those things to be aware of. Having said that, I want to go jump into some of what we're calling startup requirements, right? So,
Hmm.
what are some of those minimum viable startup requirements? And were you going to say something, Vlad?
Well, I can start on that if you'd like.
Okay.
Or feel free. I guess so. Startup requirements for a systems integrator, right? And this is assuming that you have gone off basically on your own at this point. You don't necessarily have a team or a full team to manage, so to speak. And basically, on my side, it's number one, you typically need insurance. Again, this depends on which layer of the stack you're truly touching and what the nature of the work is. But usually, you will have some sort of liability insurance and coverage required to perform the type of work that we deal with on the systems integration side. You will obviously need to spend some capital paying for the fees to open up an LLC to manage some of the back end work. It could be bookkeeping, it could be QuickBooks. You start needing to basically have a service to track your mileage, to track your expenses. So there's going to be little tools here and there that you will need to spend on ultimately, and we'll get a little bit deeper on the technical side. But for me, it's also understanding the licensing slash the software and hardware and the tools that you're required to perform the work. Again, if you're dealing, for example, and we can talk about this a little bit later with ignition, you can test and pretty much build everything and allow the customer to purchase the license versus some of the other providers. You will be expected to some extent to carry the programming licenses. And so some of the startup requirements can be how would I say it, can be nuanced depending on what you're doing, but ultimately you will have to invest in getting started in this business. What are your thoughts on that side, Dave?
Absolutely. We started with a small list. We came up with a much larger list.
Hmm.
The list is probably like 1/10 of those things that you need to go through and consider. As I look at it, every time I go to start up a venture, every time I go through the process of naming something, names are important, and beyond just names being available in your state or province for registration, you also have to go, and you guys really should go check to make sure you can legally register. That it's generally a simple process, but beyond just that, you probably also want to go figure out if you can go buy a website domain that's going to be
Mm.
reasonable, so you can have email and all of these other things that go through the process of connecting. I would say, in my experience, typically much beyond that, it's more of a like a la carte style menu and offering, right? So like maybe you need to buy insurance for what you're doing. Maybe you're doing some of that contracting work that Vlad had talked about, and depending upon what some of those agreements look like, maybe you're just going in under someone else's insurance. Maybe you need to go have legal representation on retainer to go read a whole bunch of NDAs and MSAs and a whole bunch of other documents, or maybe you've done that several 100,000 times and don't feel compelled to need to pay for someone to go ahead and review all of those documents. So I think kind of be much beyond that, it becomes an a la carte. As I have gone through this personally, and as I've talked to other people about it, it feels like you could make that like near infinite list of the 400 things and pieces of technology that you have to go make a decision on, and you're just never going to go get through all of that list. So having QuickBooks or having another accounting software, the vast majority of the world does use it, but it's not something that you necessarily need to have on day zero. An email
Hmm.
address and going and making the decision of Google versus Google Suite versus Microsoft is probably a decision that I would suggest you guys make, so you can have like real company emails when you go about starting this up. And that is absolutely a
Well, that
positive
decision is
thing.
obvious, but maybe not to everyone.
Okay, I mean,
Google,
yeah, we
Google
won't get
versus
into that.
Microsoft.
Yeah, I was gonna say we won't get into that. And then when we talk about kind of like your software stacks, when we talk about licensing and tools, I think it's very much a as it comes sort of solutions. Like, do you need a CRM? Do you need an ERP? Do you need to go pick and purchase which project management solution you want to have for the rest of time? No, you probably, if you're a single person, you almost certainly don't need that going in. That's as you grow and build and scale. That's an as you grow and build and scale thing. And we could like really get into the licensing and the tools of the Rockwell versus the Siemens versus the everything else. But I feel like that's just going to go drive us into a much deeper conversation. If I may, go pick the
Yeah.
tools. Go
Yep.
pick the tools and buy the licenses of the things that people are paying you to do and use, and then go ahead and move on from that point. Yes.
We do have a good question, which I think relays well into the next section of our conversation, and basically on the sales versus technical side. So I'm going to bring up the question, and I think we can make the transition as well. Oh, oh, let's see here. So Tim is asking, how much of business building is tied to timing, luck, relationships versus performing actual good consulting work and pitching new work that requires additional headcount? So there's a few components here that I would like to maybe break down a little bit. So I would say when you're starting out, and this is what we're going to get into in just a moment when it comes to finding customers, usually you want and do have some projects lined up before you quit your current employer. And so those customers typically come from previous work. Perhaps if it's not under NDA, come from the existing work. They bring you on as a contractor slash consultant. To answer the question of how much is tied to timing, luck, and relationships, well, obviously, I think we all have a general sense of the economy, and we all have a general feeling of when some of the projects are more or less available. So I would not advise anyone to get into integration as we're on a downturn. Perhaps it is time to stay put in a position. I think it's very difficult to answer what percentages correspond to those timings versus luck and relationships. I would argue that if you have a Rolodex of people to call upon, which I would say is unusual, of highly technical people, then obviously it helps. But again, I think that if you have a solid few relationships that can bring you work and that can get you some of the first contracts, that is usually how I see people make the jump. And I think that is, I would say, the most valuable over the ability to deliver on the technical work. That's not to say that you are going to learn how to build the systems from scratch as you start the project, but it is to say, if you're unable to find the projects in the first place, none of the technical expertise really matters. And I hope that answers the question. It's very hard to put percentages on that side.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and try to answer that slightly differently for Tim.
Sure.
I think when we talk about building a book of business, I look at it differently when you're an early company versus when you are in theory, larger company and organization and have perhaps a dedicated sales staff and everything else like that. So when you're early and a kind of small number of people, I think those, especially relationships and the timing, are extremely important. I think the vast majority of folks who go start out, their first project or first projects is probably from relationships that they already have. Maybe it's going and doing work back at the facility that they just left. I've got one orange juice facility where the systems integrator that I was working through, every 8 to 12 months, their lead person at this facility would leave the SI and go work internally as the lead engineer, lead maintenance manager person. And then another 8 to 12 months later, they would leave that position and then come back contracting, or maybe they would go they would leave the SI, go in contracting, then take a position, and it just kind of rotated for the 4 or 5 years that I knew those guys really well. And I kind of thought it was just a wild cycle of, we're going to go try you out and pay you this, and then we'll pay you something else, and then we'll bring you on staff full time, or vice versa. So to Tim's point, I think it's a really high percentage of timing and relationships, probably less luck, but timing and relationships. And then as you continue into business, a lot of it, to Vlad's point, is still timing and relationships, right? You could go pitch, I don't know, a PLC upgrade solution, and if it's not within the budget, or if they just replaced all of the PLCs, there is a near 0% chance you're going to go win that. So it's very much the relationship building of knowing what's going to need to be quoted, going and doing the work, going and building some of those relationships, so you can be more successful. So you can go be more successful into the future. As to the performing good consulting work, or pitching, or doing a good job pitching those solutions, a lot of it really goes back to that relationship building and the timing, right? Is it something that they're looking for? Do they have budget? If it's CapEx budget, do they have CapEx budget in this year, or is it CapEx budget for next year? And the larger, more expensive projects that you're getting, the further and further those things get pushed out. I was looking at a robotics project, and cobots are running something 26 to 30 weeks, and industrial robotic arms were running something 45 to 52 weeks from purchase, or from agreement of purchase order, until you could go get an installation on some of those solutions. So again, it really depends upon lead time and other things that you are working on. I feel like we kind of hit the early customers that I feel like we really hit the early customers that we wanted to talk about. Vlad, did you want to talk some about kind of referrals and brand visibility and marketing and some of these other topics?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, again, in the early stages of a systems integrator, regardless of the type of work you're performing, some of the biggest questions, of course, as you're trying or looking to grow, is to understand where are the leads ultimately coming from. And so, as we've mentioned multiple times now, usually your first projects or first, dozen projects, again, depending on the length, are going to come from your existing network, your existing leads. As you start building relationships with end users, with other systems integrators, with OEMs, the ones that provide you with the hardware, the software, as well as the distributors that you usually lean on in case of emergency or needing to buy certain equipment, you will start to figure out which partnerships are a little bit more fruitful than others. I will put it that way. And of course, there's a lot of variables there as well. And so, one of the biggest questions that come up as the integrators are just starting out or looking to grow is which relationships are more important when it comes to getting into some of the projects that they desire, right? And so again, this brings back to as to why you wanted to do this in the first place. And the answer is usually for a highly technical person to get more interesting opportunities and to work on something they haven't had access to in the past. And so for me, like I said, there's going to be a couple of different ways of getting leads. Of course, it's going to be referrals from the end customer as you perform more work for them. Depending on their size, they might have sister plants that will have similar production lines or facilities that require similar type of work. You will also have OEMs, like I said, that are looking to find people that can integrate their hardware and software. And number three, distributors who are looking for channels that can, again, integrate some of the solutions that they are selling to the end customers. I don't have a strong preference between the three. The usual comment is end users, if you work directly through them, are going to be the best way of getting some of those other projects. But of course, if you establish yourself as a credible integrator in the eyes of the OEM, and or distributor, which can take years, if not decades, in certain situations, as well as a long list of different requirements that you need to hit, which is a whole other conversation, then you will probably be given some of the better project among the pool of many other SIs that are probably knocking on the doors for the more interesting or more lucrative opportunities. What are your thoughts on that side, Dave?
Yeah, no, I would generally agree with the things that you were saying, Vlad. I think
Mhm.
Tim really set us up for a good, very solid set of answers when it comes to kind of finding some of those early customers and very much along the lines of the relationship building. Alicia in the comments is saying that every coworker and colleague is a potential future customer. Relationships are everything. You
Mhm.
very quickly become known as a person who does a very good job, or perhaps the alternate person that I wouldn't want to go work with in the future after a project or after a couple of projects. And that typically spreads throughout the departments, right? So you're either known as someone who can go deliver, or you're known as someone who can't go and deliver. And you don't typically see the groups that consistently under deliver and underperform invited back for additional projects as we move forward. I
Yeah.
think like on the referrals and the partnerships and the marketing, the brand visibility and things like that, I 100% agree. Building those relationships with distributors, building those relationships with other networking folks, building those relationships with others within the community who know what you do and are looking for opportunities to go ahead and potentially help direct you into some opportunities. Absolutely the best way to go ahead and get in there. Marketing is of course super important. Having said that, very infrequently when you're starting out are you going to go market your way to a whole bunch of opportunities that weren't already within your network, right? That people didn't already know you or know of you. And maybe they didn't realize that you do, X thing. And they're like, oh, let's go do some of this work together. So very infrequently are you going to, as a smaller organization, market your way to a whole bunch of new customers. And so from my perspective, that's absolutely what I would say, just to be cognizant of setting those expectations. And content is super important. Having said that, you could go spend 100 hours a week just producing content and not producing any work and not having any conversations with people that could potentially go lead to work.
Yep.
Let's go ahead and jump into financials, right? So
Yep.
it's the thing that I feel like we as a community on the manufacturing industrial side don't do a particularly good thing of discussing or having transparency. And so you may walk in and someone may be quoting on-site electrical work for $95 an hour, and your standard rate is $150 an hour, which is still less than the normal electrician rate, which is $180 an hour, which is still somehow less than the rate of the service tech for my parents' hot tub. Longtime listeners will know that I have remarked several times that how do my parents' hot tub technician, how do they get paid more per hour than many rates that we see going. So I kind of wanted to go ahead and talk about a couple of things, specifically in regards to setting hourly rates. And I'm going to come at this from the perspective of, this is a new systems integration company on your side. So I guess everyone should be cognizant, if you're starting out on your own, and let's say your goal is to go work 2,000 hours a year and you're going to go take a contract working 2,000 hours a year. If you charge $50 an hour, you in theory do make $100,000. But then you miss all of those important things, like we're going to lose 20 to 40% of that to taxes. We've got other overhead. You probably have internal expenses. You potentially might have healthcare. You might have insurance. You might have business insurance and all of those other things. So if you look and say, hey, I'm making $100 an hour, you should go put a multiple on that as opposed to just divide it by 2,000 or 2,080 as we're going down that. So I guess first and foremost, if someone wasn't aware of that and are thinking about going and taking a contract, just be cognizant of all of the extra costs that you are going to go and incur as you are going down this process. And then beyond that, unless you're taking a position that you're just going back to one particular site 40 hours a week every week, the odds of selling 2,000 plus billable hours is very small, right? If you have to go through the process of doing the admin, if you have to go through the process of doing the sales, if you have to go through all of these other processes, your engineering billable hours are going to go ahead and get eaten up. So maybe it's 1,200 hours is your billable hours over the course of the year. Maybe it's 1,500 hours is your billable hours over the course of the year. Maybe you don't bill while you're traveling and you're traveling every week to and from a plant and you're losing 8 or 10 or 15 hours every week as you're going through that. So if you're looking at it from the very beginning, I would just be very cognizant of what pay looks like in relation to leaving a potential W-2 job. Because I know for some people, they see a big number and are like, oh, this is a whole lot more money than I was going to make. And then we just forget to do things like pay taxes. And the IRS folks always are going to go find a way to make their money. Or for Vlad, the Canadian revenue folks are always going to go find a way to make their money. I would say beyond that, it's very common, beyond going ahead and talking about setting hourly rates, it's very common if you're selling hardware and or software to have some sort of margin or multiplier or markup on that. I personally have seen it as little as 0%, as it's just a pass-through cost, but there is potentially some bonus or some value of you being able to go claim that customer for the end user. I regularly will go see it as high as like 20 or 30%, but it's not necessarily super uncommon to go see those projects 50, 60, 80%, depending upon, again, overhead and costs and what it is that you are actually going through and selling. And then we get onto the whole hardware side of things where we're stocking parts. And so we've got all of that additional overhead and warehouse space and everything else along those lines. And then I guess kind of last comment that I want to go ahead and throw out is if you're bidding a project, typically we see two different types. So a time and materials of I'm going to go charge, call it $100 an hour for my work, or I'm going to go charge $200 an hour for my work. And I will go ahead and bill this, or I'll bill this against a block of hours you've given me. And at the end, we'll go figure out what the actual cost was. And we'll typically go give you updates every week or 2 weeks or month. Depending upon what type of project it is and what type of organization it is, or else we put together a number and the number is 100,000 or the number is $5 million. And everything we don't spend in hours and materials, we hopefully get to keep. And hopefully there's some money left over at the end of that thing.
I guess you've provided a very thorough summary of this section. What I will say is, it's important not to get overwhelmed, but ultimately every negotiation has a certain amount of risk. And I think that every single item can be negotiated to either side, being it the integrator looking to bid on a project or be it the end user who's looking to have that project done. And ultimately I guess the question for at least new or young systems integrators becomes, what can we negotiate? And the very high level answer is absolutely everything. Mm-hmm. And so if you're going to, for example, get paid on an hourly block basis versus bidding the entire project, you can immediately figure out who's going to take more of a risk, if that's going to be the end user or that's going to be you, and you can either increase or decrease the pricing accordingly. Similarly to what Dave has mentioned, if you're going to be eating the travel costs and it takes you 6 hours each way to get to a facility, well, you can probably charge a higher rate and give that as an argument for your position to mitigate the risk of always losing 2 days out of the week for the travel on site as a result of that contract, right? Because again, you need to calculate all of that time spent into what it is that you are doing. I would say that usually you want to be, as Dave has mentioned, very cognizant as to what the trade-offs are when it comes to doing the actual work versus all the overhead that comes with it. Therefore, it is not always as lucrative from a financial standpoint to be a contractor versus remaining an employee at a company, despite your hourly rate on paper being significantly lower as an employee versus the contractor. So I think, again, everything can be negotiated and probably should be in the conversations that you're having on those projects.
Absolutely. And I'd like to use that point as to go ahead and kind of reiterate some of the other things that we've said. If you see things in contracts or otherwise that look absolutely wild and out of line and or don't necessarily fit what you are providing, 100% go ahead and call those out and tell people that it's just going to make the project more expensive. I fairly regularly will go ahead and do that. And depending upon what the project is, lots of times we'll remove the clause, or lots of times we can do an addendum to some of these clauses and other things in order to help keep their costs down. Lots of times, especially on like master service agreements, they've written it for like the absolute worst case scenario ever. Like, you may have to have $100 million of liability insurance because depending upon what it is, you may be like cutting out concrete and setting big footers and putting large machines and other things in, and they're worried about potentially destroying the entire they're worried about potentially destroying the entire building. That is literally something that I have seen in the past, and would be exceptionally expensive because I don't know anyone who would carry anything even that close, when it comes to insurances. Vlad, you want to talk about technology?
Yes, so I think moving into technology, right? And so here we define it as the internal tech stack. I think we'll also talk a little bit on the external tech stack, which is going to be the tools and the software and hardware that you're going to be using for the actual projects. But let's start off with the internal. So here we said choosing the project management tools, providing version controls, backups, VPNs, different security protocols. So, what do you need to get started when it comes to sort of your own technology choices for the company? And so, again, I think this goes back to number one, which is for me at least the question is which layer of the stack are you looking to operate on, right? And when I say layer, I usually refer to the ISA 95 standard, which is going to be are you providing and talking about PLCs and HMIs? Are you talking more about SCADA? Are you talking about MES? Are you maybe talking about specialty software? Because all of that ultimately falls under systems integration, but your idea of deploying, for example, a CMMS or a LIMS is going to be vastly different than working with plant floor hardware and software. But in a very general sense, I would say that you need to be good at number one, starting to manage some of your own projects. Of course, there's going to be perhaps tools that the contracting parties will supply you, but you will be expected to track your own hours, make sure that everything gets done on your side. You will probably have very loosely written requirements that you will still need to adhere to and report back to someone. In terms of, we talked about how you deliver the services. Again, a lot of systems integrators will support a facility if they're operating at the lower stacks. And if you're operating at a higher level, you will be a little bit more remote/hybrid. So you will have a period of working on a specific project, obviously collaborating a lot of times with different team members. And then you will have what's called commissioning or VAT or FAT, factory acceptance tests, or vendor acceptance tests once you deliver said build. A lot of times I would not anticipate a small integrator like we discussed to be building machinery, even panels, although some decide to make some smaller, I would say, designs. Let me see, what else do we have here? So the big question for me is when it comes to the technology that you will be working on, right? So when you go to some of these environments, and this is a conversation I've had multiple times with Alicia, you will basically have to learn on the fly, so to speak. You will be faced with challenges that you have not necessarily worked with before. And again, this is related to tech. So you can be thrown in an environment if you're specialized on Allen Bradley, Siemens, or any other controller for that matter. You will be given a plant that has other technical considerations, and you will have to either learn what that project requires of you, or you will have to simply say no or bring in a different set of skills that will complement your own. So I think for me, that is a very important balance. And it is also a reason I would argue that we have perhaps, I don't know if the word is mediocre, but I think it's very hard to juggle 10 different platforms all at once as a sole systems integrator, right? So I think that the work definitely shows if you're a quote unquote expert on 10 different platforms looking to integrate and build solutions on all of them versus you specialize and focus maybe on a select few. So for me, a very important question as to should you basically pass the work to somebody else or should you learn the specific platform that the customer is expecting for you to integrate? What are your thoughts, Dave?
Vlad over here throwing a ton of shade on all of these small groups that have a ton of logos. He is just called out like, I don't know,
Well,
60 to 80% of small integrator websites. Just right off the bat. So I appreciate that, Vlad. It's not a choice that I would have made, but I appreciate you making that choice. Having said that, I think there are a couple of points that I want to go hit both on the internal side and then on the kind of vendor ecosystem side, the external side. Um, I think when you're picking tools, as I said at the very beginning, you need to either choose Microsoft or you need to choose Google. If you're going to do Microsoft 365 subscription or you're going to do the Google Drive subscription, it is a very opinionated ecosystem. At the end of the day, I think I own multiple accounts on all of them. So I don't personally think that it matters that much. I would go ahead and pick whatever you or you and the team are most comfortable with. Having said that, once you get beyond that and you talk about project management tools and we talk about accounting tools and we talk about ERPs or CRMs or all of these other things, I think the point that I want to make is please don't feel compelled to go out and try to buy the ERP solution that your last Fortune 50 was running. Like, you're not going to go run SAP as your first ERP system. You're probably not going to run any of these large multi-$100,000 multi-year agreement ERP solutions at the very beginning, because it's meant for a much larger organization than you are. So from my perspective, I personally enjoy going and playing and trying out some of these different tools. The majority of the kind of modern tools have a free or freemium style solution where you can go check it out and say, hey, do I like this? Can I build my workflows in it? How easy is it for me to go add other people to this solution? And then go from there. As Vlad has heard me, I spend some time every end of the year going and testing out some of the same tools over and over again, because I want to know which ones are better and does it make sense for me to go continue to stay with this particular set of tools? Do I want to go move in a different direction, go spend that extra time building some of those workflows that I otherwise would not have had time in order to go ahead and do? And then the other comment that I want to make, talking about kind of the vendor ecosystems and the Vlad Alicia conversations around, the Vlad and Alicia conversations around, hey, we get thrown into these random things all the time, is when you're starting out, you probably can't say no, right? You're probably always looking for the next project. But at some point, as you grow and as you become known for a particular set of things, it's okay to say no. It is okay to say, hey, this isn't what I particularly want to do. Let me go ahead and recommend someone I know who does this work all of the time and probably won't have to go spend 12 hours the Sunday before you show up, figuring out where I can go download the software into a fresh VM, and then how I can go run this up, and then hope that there are license keys and other things that work, and you had downloaded the right versions of the software when you show up on Monday morning. So it is certainly okay to say no when it comes to that.
Yeah, and I think, again, everything that we're discussing is obviously nuanced. I think at the end of the day, the customer for the systems integrator remains the end user. And so, again, putting myself in the shoes back where I had started my career, if I'm looking at integrators telling me that they're capable of anything and everything, I become extremely skeptical, right? And so that's why I think more so for professional courtesy than anything else, like I said, you need to be quite honest and open about what your skill set are, what you're capable of, what you can and perhaps cannot tackle. And again, when I go, as you've mentioned, maybe, and look at some of the websites of systems integrators with over 10 logos, and it's a group of 3 or 4 individuals, I become extremely skeptical, and I can almost tell you that the groups that specialize on one specific platform or maybe just a couple of platforms are going to be, again, based on personal experience, just a notch better than the groups that have absolutely no sort of focus. And it's simply human nature. I think a lot of these systems are very complex. It is very difficult to claim that you are an expert in all of these tools, having to juggle multiple different integration projects, and it is simply experience. I think it just takes a lot of time, takes a lot of patience. It takes also just years. I wouldn't even dare to say months. It takes years to master some platforms, and it is very difficult to say you are an expert in many of them. But in any case, I do want to move us into the hiring. Well, actually, let me address the last point, which was the vendor ecosystem related to my last comment, right? So what I've heard many integrators in the early stages say is that it is very difficult to not only build the relationships that we discussed a little bit earlier, but perhaps work with the tech, with some of the brands that you might be used to working for an end user. And so, what I mean by that usually is as you go off on your own, in order to be a certified SI for certain different groups, it takes a certain level of requirements. So, it is also something to consider as you make some of the platform choices. Perhaps that you should go with a group that is a little bit maybe smaller, a little bit hungrier to grow, therefore, will give you not only opportunities, but will also give you training, support, ability to call them, ability to purchase some of their products a little bit better than some of the larger vendors that might be a bit inaccessible or more difficult to work with as you are just starting out. So I think this is also a very important process that some may glance over when you have many licenses as part of a large end user and you're simply able to get that from a pool, get whatever license you need, get whatever tools you need. You may not have that same level of support as you transition into starting out your small systems integrator. So I would definitely suggest that you take a harder look at other platforms that you may not be but need to be an expert in. Any thoughts on that side, Dave, before I move us into hiring?
No, I think
Okay.
that I think we've kind of beaten that dead horse. If anyone does have questions or thoughts on
Yep.
technology, we've had one crazy guy named Vlad in the comments saying that to use Google internally, and then we've got Chris Alexander talking about how he loves FreshBooks. I've seen a lot of people talk about FreshBooks as a
Mhm.
solution to QuickBooks. I'm pretty sure I've seen very long threads from Alicia, or maybe we had a conversation with Alicia on FreshBooks versus QuickBooks, and I don't even remember where Alicia has ended up on that. But I do think it's gone back and forth a couple of times.
Yep.
Having said that, Vlad, I'd like to go jump into hiring. I think there are a bunch of things that we can go talk about when it comes to
Yep.
hiring, but I think that the number one thing that I want to talk about is getting through that first hire, right? So lots of small organizations, it's always the question of how do I make my first hire? And
Mhm.
when is the right time to make that first hire, and how much money should I have in the bank for that first hire, and should I be able to like go pay us for 3 years based upon only my work before I make that? And it's really difficult, right? And I think mentally it's probably more
Mhm.
difficult than anything else. So I would say in my experience, that first hire is almost exclusively coming at the point in which the sole proprietor is so overwhelmed with all of the projects, they are they're looking to go ahead and offload a full-time or a full-time-ish job to them, or they've got a long-term project coming up and it makes sense to go bring someone in. It makes sense to go bring someone in to go spearhead that project or come in as a junior engineer in order to go add and help and support.
Yeah, and as you said, those conversations are extremely tricky because you ultimately become responsible for that person's well-being, not only on the job but also relying on you for the income that is brought in. I can tell you from personal experience that is quite a balance that you have to maintain if you are someone who's a little bit late perhaps on getting paid by the customers. Again, there's no shortage of stories of companies either taking, and we've not talked about this, but A lot of companies will be net 90, basically paying you after 3 months. Some will be net 180. So after you've performed the work, you're only getting that money after that specific period. And so a lot of times you will be paying someone a salary expecting to get the return 3 months, if not 6 months later. So you do need to have a certain level of certitude that you will get paid, but also a cash flow into the business to make sure that everything is working as expected. Number two, and again, I've been in many of these conversations as you start bringing in some of your early hires. A lot of times, the groups that you're working with will be reluctant, right? And I use that very specifically because ultimately they have brought you in not because of the overall corporation that you have built, of which there's only you, but because of your expertise. And so when you start having the conversation of, hey, I have somebody else that I would like to bring on, here's maybe even the resume, here's their background, it becomes a game of salesmanship, of you explaining to the end customer as to why this second person, or I guess your first employee in that organization, can help them just as well as you have been if you're looking to maybe focus your attention on other things, or they need to be as a supplement to what you've already been doing. And so for end customers, this is also a tough sell because ultimately they're either paying now double or receiving somebody that hasn't been working on their system as long as you have. So it becomes a lot of, again, negotiations and conversations around the salesmanship of that person before you even consider finalizing the offer to them. So it is usually a very long lead cycle of talking to individuals, making sure that you stay on top of maintaining conversations. And as we've discussed, even with projects, when the timing is right, you can pull the trigger on hiring someone. Now, again, on the flip side, of course, you can supplement a lot of that work with contractors or fellow SIs or whomever else for the time being, or when the projects are smaller. But of course, that also has trade-offs for the company that you are building. Any thoughts, Dave, on your side when it comes to hiring and managing sort of the early stages?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say one of the mindset shifts that you have to get through if you decide to go build a company in an organization as opposed to just go find work for yourself is you're selling the company as these are the solutions that we provide, as opposed to, hey, I'm Dave, I'm really good at this, you guys know I'm really good at this, give me a purchase order to go do this thing that you guys know I'm really good at. And so it is very much a shift on going through the process of selling the company or the organization. And if you haven't gone through that is super difficult. We've got Alicia in the comments talking about 1099 employees or contractors and how cash flow is a major pain. We've got Mark O'Donovan in the comments. I think it's definitely nighttime over there, Mark. So thank you for joining us. Talking about struggled with the first hire. He's been close a few times, and you want that nice contract. And the mistakes was he should have started the company with a friend, and he hopes to rectify that in the future. But I 100% agree. As we talked about, maybe before you jumped on, Mark, it's the mindset shift of when do I go hire someone, and all of those. And I would say to Vlad's point on long-term, potentially difficult paying organizations, there is always the opportunity to negotiate less. There's always the opportunity to go negotiate the the payment durations down. Or maybe it's you start, and if it's a T&M job, you're going and billing every week or every 2 weeks, so that it's not, hey, we finished this 7-month job. Now I'm submitting the invoice. Now it's net 180, so it's 13 months or 14 or 15 months after I harassed them to go get paid. And then beyond that, there are groups that do invoice factoring. I have not personally done that for any of these smaller jobs. And I don't know what the percents are. I think it's 10-ish% to go down, to go down and go pay you quicker, and then they'll just hold the money. But again, I would look at payment terms. And sometimes they're a really good company and you're willing to go give them great payment terms, or you're willing to go harass them for 2 months in order to go pay net 30 like they promised, but they never pay net 30. And other times you may just say, hey guys, I'm a small organization. I can't or won't afford that. And because I can't or won't afford that, this is where we are at. Vlad, this
Good.
was awesome. I am actually shocked that we have gotten through all of these bullet points. I did not think it was possible. So thank you, everyone.
I thought it was absolutely possible. So we'll state that for the record. I had full confidence.
Absolutely. We're talking about payment terms with Mark. Mark's talking about 180 days. Yeah. So in like aerospace, typically like your Boeing and your Airbus and all of those are 120 or 180 days. Those are not particularly uncommon, but those are all of those that I've ever seen. Those run much larger organizations. It's certainly not something that I would be willing to even entertain. It's not something that I would be willing to entertain. And they typically go pay higher rates because everyone knows they're not getting paid for 6 months plus whatever the amount of time it takes to go figure that out. Vlad, I want to go ask you some final questions, and maybe you want to ask me some final questions when it comes to this. So I'm going to go ask this one because it's my most favoriteest of questions. It's the predict the future question. So what do you think the next 3 to 5 years look like, specifically when we talk about systems integration?
So I would say a couple of things. Number one, I think that at least I see more and more individuals go off on their own and attempting to start a systems integration company. I think that there's going to be more solopreneurs that will be building out I want to say more of a contract base than a company. So we will see more of that. I also expect to see more focused or specialized systems integrators. So I think for the longest time, we've seen even the largest integrators focus across the board on different verticals, as well as the different layers of the stack. I think that we'll see as time goes by, and this is primarily driven by the complexity and the nature of the platforms. It is simply, again, and I keep saying this, I think it is more and more difficult if you're integrating systems to have the skill set across all layers as well as different industries and verticals. And so I think that integrators will be specialized in, for example, I'm going to integrate MES for pharma. I'm going to work on PLCs and controls, maybe in food and beverage batching solutions, right? So it's going to be a lot more specialized in 3 to 5 years as the industry, like I said, becomes more and more complex. What about it in your side?
Maybe kind of similar. I think we're going to see a lot of the squeeze on the mid-sized systems integrators. We've managed to make it to like the 18 to 24, maybe 30 people. And we do a whole lot of different things. I think that we are going to go see a bunch of squeeze in that because of attrition, because we've got a lot of that top talent wanting to go hang out their own shingle, because I think a lot of the larger groups and organizations and private equity and all of these folks are trying to go buy as much as they can go possibly try to buy up. And so I think we're going to see kind of a big lack of those mid-sized systems integration organizations. I think we'll see more larger organizations continue to be successful. I think we'll see some smaller organizations continue to grow and thrive. But I think the kind of the medium groups are really going to struggle. Vlad,
Do you think that's a net positive for the end user?
I'm not sure it's a net positive for the industry, but I guess kind of to expand beyond that, I think a lot of the integration groups that we see, especially kind of like some of those medium-sized groups, are run by folks who are near retirement age. And like a lot of those are not sellable businesses, right? I think a lot of kind of medium-sized businesses and organizations are not necessarily sellable as I have seen them. And we don't have documented processes and procedures and all of these things. And the goal or potential would be we sell it to the top level of employees that currently exist within the organization and try to have a cash out, and we try to get some handover work. Or if we're unable to do that, the company is just going to cease to exist, be that systems integrators or be that lots of other organizations. And I mean, quite frankly, systems integrators are not particularly valuable organizations because the majority of them don't own property or very much real property in relation to real estate. They don't stock a lot of hardware. We've all got a bunch of computers that are old. We've got employees that are here for some period of time. And then beyond that, we have typically not like 5 or 10 year plus worth of service contracts that we have out into the future. So systems integration companies as a whole are not particularly worth a ton of money, especially from the outside looking in, unless you can go make those transitions. So I think we're going to lose a lot of that knowledge base. I think that knowledge base will continue to get fractured. I don't particularly see a lot of the largest systems integration companies going and scooping up a bunch of that best talent because they may or may not fit within the mold of the 5,000 person integration company. If one person is very good at, these 2 or 3 specifically different things.
Yeah, that's fair. That is fair. I'm curious to see where things go. Definitely. Let me ask you to start us off with the career advice.
Absolutely. So we've just talked about systems integration for like 75 minutes. As you've heard, I spent some time as a systems integrator. Vlad has spent some time as a systems integrator. I'm going to give you guys a very similar career advice that I gave when I think we talked about starting a business of some sort end of last year is don't. Right? Like it's really difficult. There are lots of things that you're going to have to grow and learn. And if you are particularly happy and excited about being the technical resource, and you're not particularly happy and excited about doing the networking, about doing the sales stuff, about figuring out accounting or marketing, go figure out if it is possible for you to be happy working within some other organization. I would suggest that you go work within some other organization. Although it's all certainly possible that you guys have reached the point of that that is not going to work. And if that's not going to work, then go ahead and start a systems integration company and just be fully prepared for all of the things that you are going to be forced to learn. Hopefully you enjoy learning because you will learn a lot.
I will take maybe the opposite side of that advice and say that unless you have, I want to say, financial responsibilities towards your family, do take the leap because it will give you an appreciation for the other fields within an organization. And ultimately, if you do decide to come back, having maybe not succeeded to build your own organization, you will be a lot, I don't want to say smarter, but you will be a lot more informed as to what it takes to run such a company and also to work with such companies if you go back to an end user. So my advice would be, if you do have the opportunity, do try and start something of your own, if for no other reason other than learning as to what it takes, what kind of issues there are, how do you maybe approach some of these challenges, and ultimately you do have a higher potential reward of success if you do work through some of those problems.
Absolutely.
All right. Book and content. What do you have for us this week, Dave?
So I'm going to go give a similar content recommendation that I give about it was every year, the first couple of years of the show. And now I couldn't tell you the last time I gave it, but it's a website. It's score.org, SCORE.org. And we'll go ahead and put that in the chat, and we'll go ahead and put that in the show notes. If you guys are looking to go start a business, it is a free resource full of volunteer mentors. Also, they put on a bunch of webinars. They've got a bunch of documentation and other things. If you really want to go look at any of these things that we talked about, but like in excruciating detail, or have like thousands of accounting or other financial questions or other things like that, or just want to go bounce your ideas off of someone else to make sure that you're not absolutely crazy, 100% would recommend going and checking out the SCORE organization. Absolutely a fantastic resource.
Interesting. I will have to look into that. On my side, I have been working on a couple of projects that require me to revisit some of the standards I have very loosely known about and obviously understood the standards, but ultimately never had the need to apply them to the letter. And so I've been revisiting a lot of ISA 95 and ISA 88 specifically. So that's for batching processes. And also, as part of my OT networking course initiative, I'm looking into some of the cybersecurity requirements and topics outlined in 62443, which we've discussed on the podcast multiple times. But I want to be a little bit more familiar with those standards than I have been in the past. So I would say those are my three recommendations. I'm looking at the different sections. There's going to be basically like 5 manuals for each one of them. So there's a lot of materials, but if you're working in integration, if you're doing work especially in regulated industries, or if you're interested in cybersecurity and networking, I recommend that you check out one or all of the 3 standards that I have listed.
Awesome. I
Yep.
appreciate that. Vlad, I'm going to go make you answer this question first, because it is your question, and I feel like you're just using it to get more ideas for companies and organizations to start. You're just crowdsourcing your ideas from us and our guests.
Yep.
If you could go start a startup, if you could go create a solution, kind of anything that you would like to see, what would that thing be?
Yeah, so this is a very difficult, but I think also very interesting question that I think is always, I think it reveals something not only about the idea, but also about the person thinking about some of these topics. Obviously, AI is top of mind for absolutely everyone that you speak with. I think that everyone has some thoughts and maybe applications of AI in a very broader sense. What I think will happen before I guess I pitch my idea is I think that we will see the application of very specialized AI in different sectors, whether that's in the context of manufacturing, whether that's on the maintenance side, on the operation side. Again, I think it's going to get segmented even further than that, right? So I will see, I presume, AI for, let's say, a batching process. We can look at your
Mhm.
batch and tell you what went wrong or what went well with your batch. We can take a look at your OEE, and basically, if it's a discrete process, we can apply our AI to understand those assets. So for me, the interesting opportunity for AI right now is, a lot of times I spend my hours basically troubleshooting and understanding different systems. And so my general understanding, and obviously I have a good understanding of Rockwell and Siemens, is that you can parse a lot of the code on the PLC and any development side in text format. So I would like to see an AI focused for PLC, HMI, and SCADA layers that can ingest different programs. And not only so, I've seen applications where it spits out documentation, but be able to be queryable and augmented by engineers as a result of, like, I'll give you an example, right? So a lot of the tasks on the project side will be, we have this machine, we would like to add a push button that allows us to, I don't know, maybe sequence a certain specific item within the cycle. How do you get that done? Well, you open the program and you're going to very painfully step through all of the logic to figure out where that lies. I think it would be awesome to have a very focused AI that has been trained specifically on PLC and machine code that can analyze it and spit out the answer to some of those higher level queries. So if I were to building something on the AI side, since I understand that layer extremely well, I would probably be looking at analyzing the components there. And ultimately, I think that also opens doors to other opportunities within projects for systems integrators.
Okay. That was like a very particularly long answer. So we definitely expect an MVP. I don't know, the day after Canadian Thanksgiving or something like that. Give you 3 weeks or thereabouts. As I was telling you ahead of time, if I had to pick an AI startup, I just really like something that could generate pictures that have text that's readable and not just like partially readable and goes to absolute gibberish about half the time. But my concept, kind of along the lines of starting and running a systems integration company, and I don't think it's a feasible organization or a feasible company, is like an Amazon style UI that has all of the tools, hardware, software, PLC starter kits, computers, everything else that you would need to go ahead and get started within the industry, or everything that you would need to go ship all sets of your next employee. Of, hey, I've just hired Vlad, we're all working remotely, Vlad wants his MacBook and he gets the standard set of everything else. Or I've just hired Dave, Dave wants his Lenovo ThinkPad, so he gets the ThinkPad and then he gets the standard set of everything else. Like, I think that would be really cool to go ahead and have just a one-stop shop for that to exist. I have briefly had a discussion as to what it would take, and I think it would be really cool if you could go send a bunch of hardware and starter kits and everything else out at the same time. And I think it makes that concept nearly impossible, but I still think it would be really fun.
I'm just laughing at that idea because I have a feeling some people will send you the laptops with the largest power supply that you have to lug around, one of those, engineering workstations that I have still some
Absolutely.
PTSD from.
I mean, there are like so many things, and so like when I have been at tech school or when I've been at other places, like you buy the kit, right? Like you buy the set, and it's expensive, but it comes with everything you need. And again, I think it would be really cool to have I can go send out to anyone who is joining my organization the standard set of everything that they need. And yes, it may be a second or third power supply to a similar computer that they already own. And maybe everyone gets 2 additional monitors, and maybe they do, maybe they don't necessarily need it based upon their desk or their setup. But everyone gets the exact same thing to go ahead and start doing that. And you don't have to worry about going down the path of finding someone to go figure that out every single time.
Yep.
Every single time. I feel like there's lots of hours, especially as smaller organizations, that are painful to go ahead and need to figure out.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea, right? Because you can tie that into even your Amazon, Costco, eBay APIs. Pretty
Yep.
much get real time pricing, and at the same time on the AI side, you could ask a few questions about the role of that specific person, and it could be something as simple as a $400 laptop just to be able to get on the web versus a powerful engineering workstation that could be $5,000 with multiple screens or one of those curved monitors. So yeah, I think it's an interesting idea. I'd be honestly surprised if there's no general solution to that, but I can imagine it's more you get in touch with like a Dell and you tell them what you need and they will maybe handle just a tiny portion of that customization. But I think it
I think
definitely
as
makes
you
sense.
get bigger and you've got managed IT solutions, you can probably get like the laptop IT
Yes. Yep.
solutions show up. That is something that in theory exists. The reason why I don't think it's possible is because, again, I think it'd be really cool if you can go get your, micro logics or your compact logic starter kit and your S7 1200, S7 1500 starter kit, depending upon the direction that you're going, and
Hmm.
a number of other things, all on, I don't know, 1 or 2 or even 5 clicks, and everything gets sent and is delivered to the person who is starting, hopefully a couple of days before they're starting, not I'm waiting 3 weeks trying to track down this particular thing. And oh, this was out of stock for 6 months, but no one updated it on the website. I just got it after they confirmed the purchase order. So I think it would be interesting. I think it would be a lot of fun. I think it would go save time. I am not necessarily sure it's a viable business solution, given all of the manual time it would take, especially if people were going and acquiring some of that hardware and other things and putting it on their own shelf, waiting for those solutions to ship. So it could be the easier, premium experience.
Yeah, absolutely. How can our listeners help you, Dave?
Absolutely. So I would say if you guys are an end user, or I suppose also if you're an integrator or thinking about becoming an integrator, I do a bunch of work when it comes to understanding the machine software interface. So on the operational excellence side, on the going and finding projects to go help reduce costs or improve throughput. But most of the time when I have conversations like this on the internet, if you guys are developing with an ignition and are looking to go ahead and expand, especially on the data side and the modern visualization side, if you guys are looking to do that, go ahead and reach out. That is probably the easiest point for us to start working together. Vlad, how about you?
Yeah, so on my side, I would say I am more than happy to exchange messages with almost anyone involved in manufacturing and the industrial automation space. I still do some mentorship and have good ties with some of the student associations. So if you have any questions or advice on the career side, more than happy to chat. On more of a commercial side, of course, I am also looking to speak with primarily end users looking to solve some of the plant floor challenges, whether that's technical, whether that's business, again, systems or personnel or education. Happy to have those conversations. For me, again, usually that's going to be engineering managers, managers of operations and above, so your VPs, your directors, C-suite. And like I said, ultimately happy to have a conversation in a general sense. And if there's opportunities that we can work on together, would be happy to discuss that as well.
Awesome. Vlad, thank you so much. Everyone else, thank you for joining with us and hanging out and for all of your questions and comments and everything else. If you guys have made it this far, please make sure you're connected with Vlad and myself. If you're watching on LinkedIn, as most of you are, we'll go ahead and we should already be there and easy to connect. Please make sure you're following Manufacturing Hub. There are a number of you guys on YouTube today. Please do the like and share and subscribe and all of those things. We've almost hit 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel, which is pretty cool. I mean, it's like 17th subscriber number on Vlad's YouTube channels. But for us mere mortals, nearly 1,000 subscribers is pretty cool. So if you guys want to do that, awesome. That's thank you. If you are watching or if you're listening on the replay on podcast format, give us a follow, rate us 5 stars, do all of those awesome things. We are planning to be back next week where we'll continue our systems integration theme. Until next week, we'll talk.